It's
How
nice
are
to
you?
see you.
It's good to
I'm
see you.
great. Yeah, this is lovely.
How have you been?
I've been great. Yeah, what's going on? It's been a while, eh?
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yeah, we're just hunkering down for the virus, getting our seeding ready. Almost time for spring seeding, so we're busy with that.
Okay.
Have I ever told you what my job is when it comes to seeding and that type of deal? That
No.
type of thing. I'm the guy who injects the shit into the field.
Oh.
I think that's what I do to the conversation as well.
Well, you make it fertile. You know, it's the way the conversations grow.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's actually a good metaphor.
So have you been doing welding? I mean, you're just doing all kinds of things?
Oh yeah. The welding shop is pretty busy right now. So just we're doing all kinds of stuff right now. Making some packers. We did a shipment of dumpsters a week or so ago. So keep me busy. And yeah.
It's been, gosh, how long ago since we had our first conversation? That's a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think it was something like 2018. The other day someone asked me, when did you start your blog? And then I looked and it was 2018, which is 2 years ago. And it was you who got me into that. So thanks for that. But 2 years, it just, I wouldn't have thought it's been that long.
Yeah, I know. Well, a lot has happened. You're not married though. I mean, come on. I mean, what's going on? Is there a problem here? I mean, nice young man like yourself.
I suppose the Esther O'Reilly thing fell through and all that.
Yeah, she went for another man.
Yeah,
the one who got away. Yeah, you and Esther would not have that would not have gone very well.
We'd have to become Catholic so that we could get an annulment.
Oh wow! But you've had plenty of conversations with the randos, and
you
keep
turning them out,
chiming in on the Discord, and no, it's been really good. Well, maybe before we get into whatever the heck you want to talk about, maybe because it's right now there's a lot of sort of. I was actually just chatting with Esther and Alistair Roberts on Twitter, because we're talking about the three of us doing a conversation, following up on, they both wrote chapters in this book.
Okay.
And, the Jordan Peterson wave seems like a long, long time ago. And just this morning, I saw, signs of life from Jordan Peterson on Instagram and Twitter. So, who knows what's coming. Well, how about,
is your
go ahead.
Saturation point not far above the limit when it comes to Jordan Peterson at this point? I mean, I've tried listening to some of his international tour lectures, and I couldn't do it.
Oh, it's decadent. Is his
decadent. Yeah.
my take on what happened to the book tour was decadence. And I read Douthit's book, and I thought, yeah, that's the right word for that. And yeah. I'm hoping what comes out now will be wave 2.0 and not 1.2. So that's.
I find it hard to believe. Yeah, I don't know if he can get out of his political stuff, maybe. But yeah, which part of what I want to argue to you today is that the political stuff is kind of fundamental to Peterson's whole project. I don't think they can be disentangled. But what were you going to say?
No, I keep going. That's an interesting way to begin. I think it's true. The wave, he would not have had the wave he had if in the moment you know, and it was a political moment when he said, you know, C16 nuts. You won't make me do it. You know, if you put me in jail, I won't eat. You know, I mean, so it was a political moment. So on that point, you're right. But keep going. I want to hear your argument.
Well, I think this is a bit of a long argument, but
what do we got? You know, where are we going?
Let me back up a bit and try to make a different connection before I get to Peterson. I think Apologetics is essentially a political project as well. So there we go, Esther O'Reilly.
I like it. Keep going, Julian.
Okay, so think about this.
Just inject that shit right in this conversation. It'll get real fertile.
I think you're right. Oh, okay. So let's think about it this way. You have sort of pre-modernity, and you have the Middle Ages, and you have this certain way of structuring. You know, the certain hierarchy, the certain way of having political power, where the church and the state are sort of intertwined, and you know, the most powerful people are, you know, maybe the bishops, the pope, the kings, the lords, and there's this whole hierarchy. And it's sort of the way you get political power is maybe if you're rich, you can buy it. If you're really if you have a good lineage, you can get your way up. And so there's sort of this kind of political power where it's the most pious or the most well-bred people essentially who get the political power. But then you get the Enlightenment, and suddenly you have this whole
don't jump over the Protestant Reformation.
Okay,
because that's a piece of that.
Well, let's say the Protestant Reformation is the first subversion of that hierarchy, which leads to the Enlightenment down the long run, I think. Yeah. I'm not really, I couldn't really say much about the Protestant Reformation because I hadn't thought about that one, but it's a good point. Maybe you want to jump in, but
no, keep going.
So you get the Enlightenment, and suddenly what you have is it's no longer, you know, the pious or the well-bred who get to the top of the heap. It's the most rational, who can make the best arguments. It's the scientific class. It's the philosophers. It's the thinkers. And suddenly a theologian becomes someone who's looked down upon because, you know, he belongs to a different class. And suddenly, if you want to gain political power in modernity, you have to be able to, you know, make the arguments, be rational. And suddenly there's this whole new playing field where you sort of have to argue for your positions in this public, secular realm in order to gain political power. And then if we jump all the way up to the present, I think the sort of apologists versus new atheists battle is essentially a continuation of the culture wars, where you have the religious right sort of pushing to get their version of politics sort of rubber stamped by being able to make arguments for the resurrection, or, you know, proving with science that God exists or what have you. And then the new atheists come along and say, you know what, we don't like these religious people pushing their religious ideas into the public realm and influencing politics. So you have Dawkins sort of pushing back, and as you've mentioned a lot of the times, explicitly because of what he sees going on politically. So I sort of see apologetics as, you know, the Christians saying, you know, we're sort of losing political power. So why don't we sort of turn Christianity into this rational system that can go head to head with these atheists, and that way sort of gain political power. Where do we want to go from here? so now what's happened recently, which is super interesting, is you suddenly have a new alliance forming between the new atheists and the Christian apologists. And who are they fighting? They're fighting the woke, progressive postmodernists. Why is that happening? It's happening because the postmodernists are subverting this whole rationality game and saying, you know, what does rationality actually mean? Like, they're sort of just taking this playing field and starting to poke holes in it. And now it's no longer the most rational, whatever that means, who gets to the top of the heap. There's this whole new game being played. And the apologists and the new atheists are like, you know, we had this pretty good thing going with all of our debates and our, you know, rationalizing it out. So why don't we don't like these postmodernists sort of poking our game in the axioms. So let's go after the postmodernists together. And so there's this new alliance of the apologists and the new atheists against the progressive postmodernists. So I think that's an interesting. I suppose what I'm trying to say with that, I think we need to think about power in this whole conversation some more, because I think it's sort of an aspect of all of this that hasn't really entered the conversation that much, partly because Peterson sort of has a blind spot when it comes to that, because he sort of styles himself as being anti-political in some sense, and sort of prioritizes the individual over the social or over the collective. So what do you think of that whole scheme?
Well, I think so. Tomorrow I'm talking to someone who wanted to highlight, you know, the role that institutions are playing. And I think one way of let's say injecting some colored dye into the narrative that you just laid out would be to follow the institutions. And I think that begins to get at, I mean, whenever people say power, you know, power is a pretty fudgy word. I want to ask, okay, what do you mean by power? And I think, you know, what you're talking about are institutional power. So I
cultural power as well.
Yeah, cultural power as well.
But I mean, can I just poke a bit? I mean, just the stigma that gets attached to someone who's irrational or who's superstitious or who's religious or who's mentally disabled. Like, I think those are all forms of our showing what our hierarchy is of rationality, where these people who sort of can't sort of climb the ladder are sort of pushed down to the bottom culturally and stigmatized in that way. So that's maybe another aspect.
So you sent me the Caputo Wright video, which I thought was just excellent. The problem, you know, so I actually got a text from a friend this morning because, you know, I didn't put out a video today, and he says, "You've been kind of quiet. Is everything okay?" It's like, yeah, you know, there are 5 adults living in my house that I have to feed now. I've got 2 college kids that started their academic career homeschooling, and now they're going to college from home. I've got a wife who is doing some really cool things, trying to support her families effectively to homeschool because they can't go to the public school, but she's just running headlong into an enormous public school establishment that goes all the way to the quote unquote nation state of California. So everybody, and then my other daughter is working in a state office, so from home, and her PC died this morning. So, and of course over the weekend I was unclogging drains, and I'm fixing everybody's computers, and today I went to Costco, and so it's just been, I haven't had time to make videos. So I'm fine. Just haven't had time to make videos. And what happened? So then you send me this Caputo Wright video, And I listened to that, and that video is just like, oh wow, so many of the things, you know, the non-theism and all of these. And so yeah, and then you give me that video, and I already have 4 or 5 other videos I want to comment on. You send this juicy one right down the middle. But that video very much touches on this, because
yeah. I mean, I wanted to get to that too. Yeah.
Because
keep going.
So Caputo, you know, talks about the Enlightenment, and you know, so the Protestant Reformation in certain parts of Europe, you know, where basically, you know, one of the ways to understand very high level the history of Europe is the history of the relationship between 2 institutions, church and state. So you've got the Roman period where, you know, you've got the emperor and the cult of the emperor, where church, you know, church and state are one, but it's over a polytheistic world where you can easily manage multiple religions. You know, worship any god you want, as long as, you know, you honor the state cult. And so, and then of course you have the collapse. You have, you know, let's bring in Douthit's decadence. You have the collapse of the Roman Empire over a long period of time in the West, and then much later in the East, pushed over by Islam, which gets into a whole nother route. But in the West, at least, with the collapse of Rome, you have the last institution left standing in many ways, because paganism at its heart is highly individualistic, and it might, you know, sort of what happens in empire is all the little national religions get chewed up by, you know, the monsters coming out of the great deep in the book of Daniel, and emerges, of course, in the West then, you know, the power of the bishops. And but, you know, it's helpful to understand that, well, you also had these warlords basically from the barbarian nomadic tribes who would, you know, kind of do cultural assimilation on Rome and take things over. So you know, the Middle Ages is this vast, very complex context in which state power, which is sort of clannish and then tribal and then kings, you know, monarchy develops, and the church. I mean, this whole thing in Europe is just ongoing, you know, just kind of crazy. And
loose,
you know,
confederation.
And you know, if you look at, for example, the Renaissance period, I mean, there are times when the papacy was enormously weak. I mean, and so fractured, in fact, at one point you have 3 popes. So you have this long process by which the institutions of the civil, you know, the civil authorities and the religious authorities, I mean, they're just constantly co-developing over a great period of time. And of course comes the Protestant Reformation, which is at least, boy, I always get into trouble when I say this, it's at least as much a political movement as it was a religious movement in some ways. Because, go ahead.
Can I interrupt I mean,
Absolutely.
Just the category of separating religion and politics is sort of something that, I think that's something that basically gets invented at the Protestant Reformation. You can't really untangle the two beforehand. I think might be something just to throw into your thoughts.
It gets
here.
that the imagination that you can separate them comes at the Enlightenment, and you know, individuals like Voltaire. You know, Voltaire basically says, you know, the Muslim and the Jew and the Catholic and the Protestant, if they're on the docks in commerce, they can get along just fine. And so this secular space, as Tom Holland talks about, this imagination of the secular develops, something which is a new thing. You couldn't find it in the Roman Empire. Even, you know, I'd encourage people to go back and actually read Plato, because I think a lot of people today in secular education would imagine the Greeks to be secularists. But if you read Plato, they're talking about the gods, and then sometimes God singular, and nobody pauses. I mean, I was reading this a few years ago, and I was reading along. I was thinking, wait a minute. So then I got a copy of it in Greek, and I was looking through it, and it's like these were not secular people.
Oh no, yeah.
And so
bring Charles Taylor in maybe as another. Charles Taylor is another guy to bring into the. I think he's behind the story you're telling. So
yeah.
keep going.
So out of the Enlightenment comes the imagination that this secular space can, and Charles Taylor, and I think also, I mean, Tom Holland, I think nicely in the videos and the conversations he's been doing has been noticing that secularity is actually a really sneaky version of Christianity that gets promoted. And, you find this. I've also been, obviously I've watched a number of videos with Peter Thiel and N.T. Wright, so a number of conversations between the two of them. And, N.T. Wright makes the observation that the role that the church played at the collapse of the Roman Empire in terms of caring for the poor, hospitality, medicine, benevolence, Western states have basically grown over and assimilated and taken over these roles. And the assumption is that, states ought to do this. And so Democrats and Republicans in the United States who, fight over all kinds of things, suddenly a pandemic hits and boom, hey, let's add $4 trillion to the national debt, without, just bang like that. And it's like, oh, well, here's something everyone seems to agree on, that it's the role of the government to help individuals have certain kinds of lifestyle and to keep them alive. Where did that come from? What we have, so you get obviously the great American experiment where there is no state church. The federal government has no state church. There are sort of, states have their own, they know that the states are sort of separated religiously. You got the Quakers and the Puritans and the Anglicans, but the federal government is supposed to be religion blind, as it were. And of course, it's Jefferson that makes sure that Bill of Rights gets in there, and the rest of the world adopts this position. Of course, with the new Islamic states that are, but even though that, you look at that and that's just sort of you're going to try that again. Good luck. See how that goes. So, your story here of, power and political power, in a sense, when I began listening to Jordan Peterson starts basically, in some ways, I mean, Caputo's interesting because Caputo gets to the end and you learn he was raised as a young Catholic. And then suddenly the whole rest of the conversation is seen very much in the light of what 200-300 years of theology and philosophy has been, which is an attempt to somehow hold on to the receding Son of God as it seems to keep going off into the distance. And postmodern Christianity, as Caputo calls it, is, that's just sort of, the prophets talk about justice, and so this will be about justice. Oh, okay. And then Jordan Peterson comes along and says, hey, wait a minute. What do you mean by justice? No, don't ask uncomfortable questions like that. And Jordan Peterson then says, you ought to have a little bit of gratitude about what has come about, because the difficulty with postmodernity is that, it's a solvent to deconstruct everything. And again, if you get back to the Benjamin Boyce James Lindsay conversation where I think Lindsay really put his finger on it. He said, yeah, if you're a social justice warrior, the one thing you won't deconstruct is your oppression. And if you can join that with the Caputo argument, you realize, oh, that's right. Your oppression is your God. Your experience of oppression is your God. This is the one thing, this is the one immovable place in the universe upon which you will build. The difficulty is you'll never be able to build a community upon it because the intersectionality will always just keep chipping away at it. Then along comes a pandemic, and now suddenly, yeah, little cries about, well, the pandemic hits people unequally. Yeah, of course it hits people unequally. And of course it's going to run up different structures, and poor people are going to have be hit a lot worse, and so on and so forth. But, you know, suddenly everything goes out of the woke argument, and now everybody's just kind of waiting to see if we'll all just sort of get along. And the longer I go with this stuff, as I look at, say, someone like you, who is, oh, this is going to really sound weird. In some ways, you're a Canadian Islamic fundamentalist. You're not Islamic, but you're a Canadian Christian fundamentalist because, you know, any community that I have very little respect for a lot of woke people because basically I don't see them doing I don't see them pursuing half their justice half as seriously as I saw people in the 70s pursuing racial justice by taking lower paying jobs and living in my parents' story and the lifestyle that I was raised with. And I look at you and you're living in community. As a community, you're practicing self-denial. You say no to yourselves. And I look at all these social justice warriors and I think, you're putzes. You don't, you know, leave the job for someone else. Okay. And go ahead and give up your great job. And Jordan Peterson says that to the chick from the GQ interview and says, well, why don't you give up your job? Oh, I don't like my job. You're a putz. You want to see someone who really believes in their worldview? Look at someone who suffers. Look at someone who denies themselves. Look at someone who, let's use Brett Weinstein. Look at someone who decides he's going to teach in this little college. At least it's in alignment with his little, sort of woke religion until that religion turns and kicks him out. So, there's a whole lot of stuff I just dumped on you. See, like I said, I haven't had time to make a video. I'm all pent up.
Yeah, just throw it all out there. Oh, okay. Oh man, where do you start here? See, I wonder if this whole, I'm thinking about the way you're using the post-modernity as sort of something you can just reject, and I don't know if that's entirely the case. You sort of get what I'm saying. Like you're sort of saying, oh, those what were you saying?
I'll finish it for you. The way you just reject it is Petersonian, because you don't have time to deconstruct everything. So in order to act, there must be an area of your life you're not deconstructing. That's the only way you can live.
Okay, here's how I would reframe that. I think Peterson is essentially, his project is essentially a response to post-modernity.
Yep.
And I think essentially what this whole conversation is with the meaning crisis and these different camps and these different responses, it's essentially, how do we react to this problem of interpretation, this problem of the fall of meta-narratives? And where do I go? So right now I'm reading another book by, last time we talked, I was reading a book by James K. A. Smith, and now I'm reading another one.
Which one are you reading now?
I'm reading his Introduction to Radical Orthodoxy. And
I haven't read that.
This one is just super relevant, I think, too, because one of the things Vervaeke keeps saying is he doesn't see theology giving a response to the meaning crisis. And as I'm reading this book, what I'm realizing is this is so he's doing this this book on radical orthodoxy. I realize this is essentially a book, a theological movement that's responding to precisely the problem that Vervaeke and Peterson are trying to solve in their different ways. And I wonder if Peterson and Vervaeke could sort of be seen as, Caputo as someone who'd fall into that whole conversation, but he wouldn't be radical orthodox. So let me try to sort of sketch it out. So essentially, what these thinkers are saying is they're sort of pointing out the postmodern critique of secularism. Sort of this, we were talking about how the secular developed as, the religion and politics were sort of closely intertwined, and then you have suddenly this development of this secular space where you can use secular reason to pursue your political projects or what have you. And then so you get the development of liberalism, neoclassical liberalism, which is basically, individual rights, individual freedom, individual autonomy, these types of, that's what the American experiment is sort of all about, is liberalism. And goodness, where do you go? And it seems like this whole category of classical liberalism is so interesting to me because it's sort of assumed by this one tribe in the culture. It's sort of assumed by, we were talking about the new atheists and the fundamentalists. Both are sort of classical liberals. Both of them sort of want individual autonomy, individual
the Apologists,
freedom. And
you called them the fundamentalists. Well, let's call them Apologists. It's a little more accurate.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Because fundamentalists are also a reaction to classical liberalism. They're a communal reaction to classical liberalism, but they assume so much of the foundation that they themselves are also a product of classical liberalism. Yeah. They just basically take the positivism and read their sacred texts through the positivism and get, these other weird things.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Peterson, I think, is a classical liberal as well.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, that's why he's.
But he's a postmodern classical liberal. He chooses it. And yes. So if you look at that Edward Dox, did you see the latest video I did?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Well, I read a segment from Edward Dox, which was a 2011 paper that I actually got from a Tim Keller sermon back probably around 2011. But, Dox makes the point that, similar point to what Dreer makes in terms of pilgrims and tourists. What happens in post-modernity is you begin to see yourself as set free from all of these narratives, which leads to sort of a radical freedom, very existentialist.
Oh, yeah.
Now you can choose. And so instead of, say, growing up in classical liberalism, Jordan Peterson now is a postmodern classical liberal, which is still a different thing because he chooses it. So he's an existentialist, postmodernist, classical liberal.
Okay, so this radical freedom of post-modernity, where sort of our meta-narratives fall flat, and suddenly we have this this absolute freedom. And this is where you get someone like Caputo, who says, we can sort of have this sense of transcendence within post-modernity, but what we need to avoid is, particularity. We absolutely want to avoid any sort of particular narrative because that's fundamentally tyrannical. So he sort of has this version of Christianity that's that its only content is essentially freedom, pure freedom is sort of all that's there. And he sort of speaks of something like justice for him is sort of this this thing that we're going to come to discover in the future, but we sort of have this little grasp of it now. So we act on that which we have now, but it's infinitely open to the future, and so we're sort of grasping our way towards so it sort of has this. He sort of takes the Christian narrative, but turns it into a ghost, and sort of makes it real or something like that. I'm not sure.
That's kind of a good way to say it.
And then you have, on the other hand, sort of the I think I would, the apologists, the classical liberals, the defenders of Christendom, and I think someone like Peterson is a pretty good candidate for this sort of opposite end of someone like Caputo, because hold on a second.
Peterson,
because
for apologists are some ways defenders of Christendom, modernist Christendom, and Peterson is sort of like a mercenary out there, and they like the battle he's fighting. They'd really love to recruit him into their standing army, but he's not ready to take the vows of the kingdom. So, but he's a mercenary.
But if you look at Peterson's biblical lectures, his sort of Jungian archetypal defense of Christianity, what he's sort of saying is we need a meta-narrative to keep our civilization going. And what we can't sort of argue for it because that can be deconstructed. So you sort of have this biological Christianity that emerges from evolutionary history. So he's sort of within this, he's sort of on this, I can see why you want to push back on calling him, putting him on the side of the apologists. He's sort of I think you're right, he's a sort of postmodern classical liberal who's doing this defense of Christendom argument. So yeah. And then you have the radical orthodoxy people, and they're sort of like to style themselves as being in the middle of those two camps. And what they do is they sort of there's these reformed thinkers who do something very similar, who sort of say we need to prioritize revelation. So we can't sort of reason our way to our meta narrative. So we sort of do it through faith and revelation, and so we sort of presuppose the Christian story, and then our rationality is sort of a Christian rationality. And so they would sort of get this this political pluralism where you have different traditions sort of competing with each other in this sort of postmodern frame. Where does this end up? Yeah. But I suppose that scheme of thinking about things, let's throw that out there.
Well, I have to, it's so interesting. So Warren has been sending me things on, Warren is my friend in Australia. He's been sending me videos from John Milbank on radical orthodoxy. Yep. And I just noted that I just downloaded the sample that John Milbank writes the foreword to radical orthodoxy. And so you're giving me more homework to do here, which is good.
Bother reading Milbank. He's impossible. Don't bother reading Milbank. He's impossible to understand.
Okay. Well, and that's sort of, gosh, I'm gonna get myself. So of course, James K. Smith is in my tribe. He teaches at Calvin College, and if there is a tribe that I'm a part of, it's Calvin College and that group. I mean, that's where I came from, and so there are a couple of people out there that want me to talk to James K. Smith so badly that it hurts them, but I've not decided to pursue it, and I don't even know how that conversation would go, and I don't know if I want to talk to him for a 1 or 2 hour video. I haven't read all his books because they frustrate me.
Really?
Yeah.
Why so?
Well, in some ways, he's doing a lot of what I'm doing. in that he's taking Charles Taylor, he's taking Milbank, he's taking Augustine, and he's trying to deliver them in, he's cutting the meat up for the kids.
Let me throw something out. How about this? I think you and James K. Smith are trying to answer the same problem, essentially.
Yes.
And maybe you'll end up in a different place than he does. You think so?
I don't know. I like a lot of so I listen to some of his videos, but I read some of his books, and I just don't, I have the same thing with, I just don't get into him. And I don't know if it's because I'm a pastor and he's a philosophy prof or what it is, but I would love it if he would, jump into this space, but so I know how he got on Rebel Wisdom, and I don't think James K.A. Smith has any interest in addressing the people I'm addressing.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's probably a bit of an elitist in that way. So.
And that's probably, and I don't know that he is, but I think he's, gosh, I'm going to get myself in so much trouble.
Oh, yeah, let me rephrase that.
Well, no, but you said it, I didn't. But I see him as being comfortable doing the circuit of all the talks. And now maybe if I had more status and, if, and this is where, some of the same critique I give to the social justice warrior, I have to give to myself, because decadence is so easy to slide into. If I made 10 times what I did, if I dropped into all of the money that Jordan Peterson dropped into, what would that do to me? If I could go from city to city making, 4 or 5 figures every night, hawking a book that's selling millions of copies, would I be talking to randos on YouTube? And this gets at the postmodern thing, because the point of that Edward Docks piece is that once you're done dissolving everything, guess what's standing at the bottom? Money. Money and status and the world. And this is why so they had that conversation between Eric and Brett and Eric's portal. And I'm listening to Eric kind of chide Brett for making the career choices he made instead of climbing the ladder. And Eric's basically running a podcast that's, gonna flame the ladder because the ladder isn't good enough. But now we're just into an inner circle C.S. Lewis conversation. So I don't know. I have no finger to point to James K.A. Smith with, because, in terms of what we're doing, I think you're exactly right. We're trying to work the same space, but I'm a little pastor with a little YouTube channel and talking to randos. And part of me thinks, if someone gave me a big fat contract to talk to all of the famous people and to do all this stuff, would I do it? Probably. And the people behind me would cheer me on. But I'm a son of people who decided to spend their lives serving the poor and serving people without status. And so I can't look at that other path and not sense betrayal.
Well, I could give you a more positive spin if you like.
Please do. Well, look at your choices. I mean, you're a young man. And the Apostle Paul says it very well. He says, hey, marry, family. I've got 4 adults plus myself to feed during the pandemic at home. It's like, I hope the church doesn't go under during this thing. And what if, so I keep an eye to keeping food in the mouths of my children.
Yeah. Well, think about this. I think what James K.A. Smith is doing is he's doing postmodern apologetics, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I think what he realizes is that, in this postmodern world, you can't really, make arguments for the resurrection, or this is historically accurate and we have proof and it's 100% certain, that doesn't work for people. So I think what he's trying to do is sort of show how Christianity can address the cultural problems we are facing, how it can be a solution to the meaning crisis, how it can be meaningful, life-giving, and at the same time push back against some of the problematic aspects of our culture. And I think then there's a certain, it's I think when he's doing that type of work, it's a bit tough for him to sort of, go on this shady YouTube channel and talk with these shady YouTube people, because he's trying to reach these mainstream, postmodern, culturally affluent people who, as soon as you find out, look at this Christian guy on this alt-right YouTube channel or what have you,
who rode Jordan Peterson's coattails to 13,000 subs.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
So yeah, there's that.
And it's no way to build a career. And this gets at a lot of the Eric Weinstein conversations, because what Eric is basically trying to do is point a finger to institutional corruption, which is in many ways the same game as the social justice warriors. They're pointing the finger to institutional corruption. And I still think Peterson nailed a lot of this stuff quite well when, yeah, that's corrupt. Yeah, it's racist. And that's why, people, you're a bigot. I'm a bigot. I'm a Calvinist. I'm a bigot. I'm a sexist. You name me a sin and I'm it, baby. Total depravity. Put a big T on my chest. And so, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But the difficulty is, okay, tell me what justice looks like. And Christianity says justice looks like the Son of God bruised and bloody on the cross, wearing the spittle of other men, and then walking out of a tomb and not going to Caesar and say, how do I look now? I mean, that's the Son of God. And the status games are, the greatest among you is the servant of all. And these ideas were, hang on a second. I got someone at the door.
Okay.
What's up? Here for a guitar. Oh, yeah, help yourself. I'm on a conversation. Oh, hello.
Bring him over.
You want. Well, you should probably. Did you bring your car? Yeah. Take his amp is over there on the stage too. So take it off, please. But you'll need the amp if you're going to play the electric guitar. So where was I? Well, that's, and so what Christian communities have done is embody this in an alternate set of values within a community and bear witness to it to the world. And in that sense, Rod Dreher's Benedict option is dead on right. But what postmodernity says is that,
well, the sectarian Hutterites just love it.
Oh yeah, and you got there first. But now, but postmodernity comes around and says, well, okay, you have to choose it, and now there's a way in which you choose it that it wasn't before. Because, I grew up into the little Christian Reformed way of, I looked at the Benedict option. I thought, yeah, Christian Reformed Church has been doing that for a long time. Those immigrant groups have been little Benedict opting all over the place. So, but this is our response to the world. And we say, we are going to bear witness to Jesus Christ, and we're going to do so as a community, and we're going to do so at great personal cost, because we believe that, well, we believe in the resurrection. And so the resurrection justifies laying down our lives for our neighbors, even if they don't appreciate it. And that's the gospel.
Yeah. I mean, part of what post-modernity entails is the loss of cultural power for Christians. One of the things you often talk about on your channel is the boom of Christianity in the 50s, where you have this civil religion type of thing. And I would sort of call that Christendom, as this sort of nominally Christian civilization. And one of the things that postmodernity does, which I as an Anabaptist think is kind of great, is that it makes Christians lose their political power, and have to find a way of being Christian that is non-coercive. And as you said with the resurrection, what happens after the crucifixion is the resurrection. So it's sort of a paradoxical time of hope for Christians.
But to get back into this narrative that we were weaving, basically what happens after Christians inherit the kingdom of Rome? And in the Middle Ages, that's what we're working through. And then, in a sense, via colonialism, Christianity inherits the earth. And how well do Christians do with that? And so to have a little bit of tension between Anabaptists and Reformed, in some ways, not having political power is a lot easier than, the Romans collapsing in. Well, we don't know what to go. Here you go, Bishop. You run the city. Oh, crap. How do I run the city as Christ would? And in many ways, it's what happens through history, or we're wrestling with these eschatological questions. And so, again, one of the things that I've been fascinated by lately, listening to Eric Weinstein and Peter Thiel, is, so now you have these eschatological questions that people, well, what is exactly progress? What does it mean to inherit the kingdom? Because Christians know how to do, well, not a lot of individual Christians in North America, but over time, Christianity learned how to do cruciform community. And that was their identity. This is how, but it's, and, John Wesley pointed this out. He said, the difficult thing is, okay, so you have, it happened to the monasteries. The monasteries, everyone took these vows of poverty, and everybody was so impressed by that renunciation and mortification that they started writing fat checks. And suddenly the monasteries have huge amounts of cash. And so the Protestants come along and it's like, yeah, you're suffering for the Lord. Doesn't look like much suffering to me. And, you have iconoclasm. And so, this is, and I really like Chesterton's point at the end of The Everlasting Man, that you have, the five comings of Jesus Christ, in a sense, because we keep going around in this circle that Christians begin to embody the cruciform witness. And now this doesn't happen in our little lifetimes, it happens multi-generationally. Christians, in a sense, they die and in a sense are given the kingdom. And then when they have power, they are corrupted by it and the cycle starts over again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Let me take this in a bit of a different direction. One thing that's interesting about Vervaeke and Peterson is how they both sort of start constructing Vervaeke's religion without a religion is such an interesting idea, because that's exactly the same. Caputo says exactly the same thing. He also talks of a religion without religion.
So everybody's talking it right now. I mean, that's the thing. The Weinsteins are talking it, but they don't dare say the words. Everybody's talking it.
Yeah, I mean, just the, I guess this collapse of the meta narrative, this collapse of Christendom, really makes you ask the question of power. Like, where are you going with this? What institutions are you going to build? How are you going to live together? And I sort of see Peterson and Vervaeke sort of going in two different directions, where if we want to be really crude, Peterson is sort of like the, he ends up at Liberty University. And I wonder if that's not a coincidence, because he's sort of saying, we had this nice meta-narrative thing going, so why don't we bring back Christendom? So that's exactly what you see the people at Liberty University doing. And then Vervaeke starts talking about religion without religion, and then you think, I can think of Christian groups that have been trying, or secular groups or Christian groups that have been trying exactly that for, the past decades or so. You were talking to this guy from formerly from the Christian Reformed Church, now the United Church of Canada. I mean,
John Sook.
Yeah, I mean, where he landed up is basically religion without religion.
Yep. Yep. He calls
So
himself
I sort
a
of
weak theist.
Yeah. So there's sort of that interesting parallel, and then you're part of this whole conversation. So the question I have for you is, what is your religious project? What is your political project? What is your response to the meaning crisis, and where where do you want to go with this?
Oh, Julian. Oh, I don't know. I'm just making YouTubes about thoughts I have in my mind. I'm a minister in the Christian Reformed Church. What do I want? I want God's kingdom to come. I want the poor to find the joy of the Lord. I want racism to end. I mean, this is the thing about the whole social justice thing, is that I've lived this stuff my whole life. And I look at the answers he's supposedly, I feel so old because I remember talking to old pastors when I was starting, and they're like, yeah, it's all the same answers coming around again. Now here I'm doing it. But and again, in some ways it comes down to my question about, what is Christianity, that I trust Jesus more than I trust myself. What do I want to see? I want to see an end. I want to see an end to the suffering in the world. I want to see, but we can't even figure out what eschatology means, or what a life outside of the briars and the thistles we live in the midst of would actually look like. So in some ways, so that sort of puts me in some weird triangle with Peterson and Vervaeke, because I'm not looking to reconstruct a religion because I'm happy with the one I've got. I am looking to build bridges to people who, just kind of anyone. And so that puts me sort of by Peterson. And, if I can help people one person at a time, find a better life, I'll do that. I don't do the whole, oh, you're homeless and you need a little help. Well, if you say the sinner's prayer, there'll be plenty of help for you. I'm not going to have them, you're not going to have to show that you've been tithing in order to get your temple access card, LDS Church. It's, and so that way I'm sort of in this weird triangle with Peterson and Vervaeke, because I'm enough of an individualist like Peterson, and I'll talk to randos, but at the same time, I'm much more institutionally minded, because I also know that the church has, the government's learned scale in many ways to bless people and help people from the church. In many ways, Western governments learned statecraft from the church and have basically subsumed many of the church's values. But, it's so funny to me, because at least in the American political conversation, I listen to the left, and they just want more government. And it's like, yeah, well, government decided it wanted to give everybody $1,200. How's that going? Government decided. So, I'm just in the middle of everyone. And I'm always in the middle. I'm too nice to the gays. I'm not, I'm not affirming enough. I'm too to the left. I'm too to the right. And in that way, again, when I listened to Peterson, I thought, yeah, if everybody's shooting at you, you're probably doing something right.
but what about the church? Like, do you have sort of any serious reforms you'd like the Christian Reformed Church to take in order to respond to the cultural moment or something like that? Or are you sort of what was I gonna say? Are you just sort of a moderate in spades or something? I mean,
so before I had a career as a YouTube celebrity, I was fairly active in the denominational heights of the Christian Reformed Church. I, was in denominational committees and all of that work. And that's good and important work, because when that work is done well, nobody notices it. And that's basically, that's how government should be. When government is really going well, nobody's actually noticing it, just like good administration. But I think finally, the life of the church is found with people face to face, belly to belly, as a friend of mine says, one to another, looking to embody Jesus Christ to a suffering world. That's at the beginning of the book of Acts, and you will be my, now will you restore the kingdom to Israel? The disciples ask. Jesus completely sidesteps the question and says, the Holy Spirit will come upon you and you will be my witnesses. And, if they had really thought about it, they said, well, wait a minute, let's see. You started this public ministry thing. You seem to get very popular in the Galilee. And then when you realized that everybody was just kind of had their hand out for miracles and free bread, you insulted them all. Then you marched down to Jerusalem, which was kind of a suicide mission. And, we had this really fun party marching into Jerusalem, only to have the crowd turn on you and then wind up crucified. That's the plan. And we're going to bear witness to this plan. And Jesus says, oh yeah, the resurrection thing. And okay, resurrection and then ascension. We were hoping there'd be like 40 virgins or streets of gold, or and this is the story. This is Christianity. So we get glimpses of glory and God's grace and power, and that's so often best seen face to face, eye to eye, around a small circle of people who are often struggling and in pain. And so I want to see God's glory. And I see his glory so often in the midst of a world that's hurting. And there's nothing about, if you read the Gospels or the New Testament, the Old Testament, read the Bible, there's nothing surprising in that picture, because it looks like Jesus. And so Jesus is the paradigmatic, he is God. There goes Sam.
Whoops.
So, and that's it's so funny, because I am a Christian Reformed minister. This is what I do. And people are like, well, you're talking on YouTube. It's like, I just do on YouTube what I am and what I do. And what I want to see is God's kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what I want to see. There you go. Beginning of the Lord's Prayer, first line. Jesus said it all right there. So I just do it in this weird way.
Wow. Yeah. It struck me while you were talking. It's kind of funny how making fun of Christianity is sort of apologetic for it. Like like when you point out how stupid and absurd this whole story is, it just becomes even more powerful.
And that's
yeah,
why I love the end of that conversation with Eric Weinstein and Ross Douthat. And do you think if Jesus came again, like he'd be just memed into oblivion? That's basically what Eric was saying. And I was thinking, go ahead and try. You know, just Google image search Jesus, and you'll find worlds of insanity. And that's where I love. I only brought it into one video, the Book of Beb. Let's see, who wrote, was it Buechner that wrote the Book of Beb? Have you ever heard of the Book of Beb?
I think I heard you talk about it.
Yeah, I talked about it once. You should read it. You can read Lions, is it Lions Country, Frederick Buechner, the Book of Beb? So here's the premise. There's a guy in Florida running a diploma mill, and he's reputationally, he did a little time for molestation of children. And there's also this real creepy story out there of maybe he raised someone from the dead. And there's a hotshot reporter who wants to try and build a career exposing this child molester in Florida running a diploma mill, and winds up, you know, and Buechner has a way of saying, all right, yeah, go ahead. You know, just try to run Jesus through the mud, you know? And that's what happens in the crucifixion. You know, do your worst. You know, nail him to a cross, strip him naked, mock him. Go ahead. It's, you know, the story of silence. You know, the Fumi is there, and the, you know, the Catholic missionary is just tortured, and the Fumi speaks to him and says, step on me. Go ahead. Mock me, memify me, do your worst against me. Go right ahead. And I will still love you. And, you know, you can't write a better story than this. It's why Jesus keeps coming back.
Yeah, that's helpful, because you know, like one of the ongoing things I struggle with is just the disconnect between my ideals for what I want the church to be and what it actually is. And you know, every time I sort of feel myself falling into that kind of you know, despair, it's always really helpful to just point the gun back at yourself and yeah, and realize you know, the people Jesus calls you to love aren't these you know, these Hollywood poor people who are super grateful and charming and delightful. You know, they're horrible, stupid people like yourself, and and people are messy, and that's Christianity.
I still have a shit stain on my door from Daniel. You know, and you wouldn't believe the amount of flies I have from Billy right outside my door. I talked to Billy yesterday. He said, Billy, you gonna get a place to live? Because this isn't a good place to live. He says, yeah, I know it. He says, I'm number 67 on the list. So, all right, me and Billy gonna be in this for a while yet. I'm spending my pandemic. And then, you know, I talked to Daniel, and you know, I help him out with something, and he wants to give me a hug. He's like, oh yeah, 6 feet. But you know, the alcohol is just wafting over me. And I think, if I could smell the alcohol on his breath, I suppose the COVID could hitch a ride. If the COVID can live through all the stuff he drinks. I mean, it's just, these are human beings. This is me. And, you know, yeah, I wear a shirt, and I'm wearing pants, and I got a YouTube channel, and this continues to employ me. But, you know, I'm not much different from them. Really, I'm not. And that's us. And so how, you know, so this is why, again, post-modernity. Okay, so now I'm radically free and I can choose. And I say, okay, you know who I choose to live like? I choose to live like that pale Galilean. I choose to live like him. Well, what do you mean live like him? You're getting paid to, you know, it's just absurd. But there's potential for glorious absurdity.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I love that. I love it. I mean, that's a better apologetic to me than it's objectively certain that Jesus rose from the dead. We can prove it with with history, or science shows that that God is real and what have you. I mean, yeah. Oh.
Sauron doubts Tolkien. Oh, okay. Sauron deconstructs Tolkien and proves to Middle Earth all there is power. All right, go for it.
Oh. Oh. Well, what are you thinking about these days?
You know, I'm so I agreed, which is probably what I should have done. You know, I agreed to write a chapter in a book project that Vervaeke is working on, and I thought, oh crap, now I have to write it, because the thing is, you know, making YouTube videos for me is a lazy man's occupation, because I just turn on the camera and talk and people watch, and I still can't believe it's happening. But, you know, to write something now, it's like, oh crap, I got to sit down, I got to write this thing. But it's really good for me. I'm glad I said yes, and it's good for me, because now I got to have a little self-discipline. And
oh yeah, writing is tough.
And you know, people so I, you know, in my last videos I talk about myself being a dramatically unsuccessful pastor, and people often try to, you know, oh, but pastor, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about how I feel about myself when I say that, because again, it's the absurdity of the gospel and my life. So I was a foreign missionary, and came, you know, part of what I learned as a foreign missionary, and part of what, you know, part of what I learned as a foreign missionary was the absurdity that I thought, here I'm going to help these people. I'm going to help these people because I have a college education, because I'm working for a very generous mission organization that has money to actually help people. And how hard can it be to help people who are making 50 cents a day? I mean, well, you know, it's really hard, because maybe you can, you know, pay them yourself, and where does that go? And, you know, and so during that portion of my life, I learned that, you know what, the idea that you can fix this world with money and power, it's a bad idea. So people are a lot more complex than that. So then I come back to North America, and I come to this church, and the whole classis at that point, all the pastors of the classis are going to go to Willow Creek with a team, like the denomination is paying for it. And we're going to go to Willow Creek, and we're going to learn from Bill Hybels how to make a prevailing church. So, oh, okay, well, it's my job. So, you know, we come back and we try doing some of these Willow Creek things. And pretty soon I look around, it's like, this ain't never going to happen here. I got an untreated schizophrenic standing up in the back, sleeping with his eyes open. You know, I got, you know, we are never going to pull off the big show to bring people in to pray the sinner's prayer. It is just not going to happen here. And so we have this, I had a friend of mine, we had this little church retreat, all our church leaders, and, you know, we're supposed to have a mission statement and stuff. And so we start doing it. I'm looking at all we're doing. I said, yeah, we're summarize this church into 3 words: dumpy, campy, homey. And of course, everybody's like, you can't put that as I said, but that's who we are. we're absurd. And so, we just keep being absurd. And 20 years ago, I thought, this church isn't going to make it. And we're still not making it. But here we are. And so I just see a degree of the absurdity of so much in this world. And I get down to the point of saying, you know what? What am I going to do? I'm going to try and do what Jesus says. I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, all the way up to and including my enemy, and see where that goes. And the hardest people that you have to, as you well know, the hardest people that you have to love are often the people you live with. And because when you live with someone, well, lots of stuff comes up. You know, because they know you pretty well, and not the pretty face on YouTube. You know, they know all your hypocrisies and inconsistencies, and so it's like, So, and so, okay, what am I going to do? You know what I'm going to try and do? I'm going to try and bear witness to Jesus as best I can. And I'm not that good at it. And so I'll encourage the people around me to do so too. And I'm obviously not that good at that either. And so, and by some strange quirk of history, thanks to Jordan Peterson, I'm now doing it on YouTube with randos. So you figure it out. It's absurd, but it's fun too. So I love it.
I recently reviewed a book on my blog called "The Patient Ferment of the Early Church." Just thinking about your Willow Creek discussion. So it's written by this guy called Alan Kreider, and he starts off the book by listing some facts about the early church, and he says, the early church just basically didn't do any mission. They didn't really go out of their way to tell people, come to church, come pray the sinner's prayer, come worship with us. And he says they didn't let people even watch their worship services.
Yeah. You couldn't just stroll into a church.
Oh no.
No.
And then when someone wanted to get baptized and join the church, they weren't too easy about that either. They had to go through this years-long process before they could even join the church. But he says, and he also points out that the Great Commission, the early church didn't even use that as a sort of as a way of telling people to evangelize. That was sort of used as a Trinitarian proof text. So take that, Sam Adams. but he says, despite all of these opposite of church growth strategies, the church sort of grew anyway, and slowly started fermenting, and he just uses this metaphor of ferment and sort of to seep into the culture to the point that by the 4th century you have Constantine wanting to get Christianity into to make it the state church. So he points out that basically the way the church grew was just by living faithful countercultural communities that attracted outsiders by the lives that they lived. So yeah, that's a pretty good strategy for church growth in the postmodern world, I think, as well.
But I think to get back to some of we can't hear, I don't know if our hearts can hear that sentence without a modernist ambition creeping in. Because we hear that and we think, okay, well, let's organize ourselves and we'll do it right this time. One of the things I've worked with a lot of church planters, and church planters are, I love them because they I'm gonna do church right for the first time, and I just love watching. And they're all young and ambitious, and they come in, and they're not gonna do things the way all people like me do stuff. They're gonna do it right. And so I just watch. The world just does to them what it does to all of us. And so when we say the patient fervent of the church, and when we say patient, we mean like hundreds of years. And it's one of the things I really appreciate about the Orthodox Church, because, they still got that in their system to a degree. And so God bless them. But it's, look at, let's say, the Donatist controversy, because, the church you just described is Augustine's church. And the Donatists look at them and like, you're putzes. Because you let those priests back who sold us out in the persecution. We're the pure, true. And, just read the book of First John, for example. You read that book and you get the sense of, It's a pretty rough little group. John was not shy about denouncing his enemies as, seeds of Satan and stuff. So, and the crazy thing about Jesus is that, and I think this is where Pageau is such a genius, is that, you can see Jesus embody all of this at once, where on one hand, he's more generous than the religious authorities think is responsible, but he's more demanding than the religious authorities think is responsible. And it's like, how do you do that, Jesus? How do you do that? Well, it gets you killed. And that's something that we don't tend to like to have happen to us. But Jesus does that. And that's something that, to anybody who's paying attention, reading that crazy book called the Bible, continues to somehow inspire people to do the kinds of things that Christians do. So, no, it's a great vision. And, that's, so Benedict option. It's no surprise that Rod Dreher, went Orthodox and would imagine that, well, the way out of our current miasma is patient ferment of small communities being very serious. Well, and we all know that those serious little communities can also get tyrannical and corrupt and all of those things too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, becoming Orthodox would be, see, it's interesting to compare sort of, the Hutterites to the Orthodox, because the Orthodox essentially, the way I understand them, have, the liturgy, and this is where you sort of participate in the eschatological kingdom of God, and you're, eating the flesh of Christ and drinking his blood, and you're participating in this heavenly reality. But the problem with the Hutterites is that we have somehow got it into our heads that you have to live the kingdom of God at all period of your, like at your whole life. So we sort of have this realized eschatology where you're sort of expected to live the kingdom in real life right now. But but the problem, of course, is when you actually look at how most of us live our lives, it ain't look a lot like the kingdom of God. So
the kingdom of God looks like dumpster welding and shit injecting in fields at sea.
No, it doesn't.
Well,
it doesn't look like.
It does, and that's the crazy thing. There's a guy on the Discord who made a tiny little video. He posted it on the Discord, and one of the things, he had a line in that video that I heard it and I've thought about it like 4 or 5 times the last few days. I'm gonna have to clip it out and probably put it in a video. But and this is where we get into God number 1 and God number 2, and this is where Sam and his resistance to the Trinity is wrong. There, Anselman, you heard me say it. Because here's the crazy thing with God number 1, it's and the whole earth is full of his glory, in him we live and move and have our being. So it's everything. And the part of what was at the heart of the Reformation was an attempt to get back to that, because something of that had been lost in the corruption of the church. And so it is injecting the fertilizer into the field and welding the dumpster, and it is all those things, but figuring out how, and so this is where God, and what is more real, this idea of God or the man Jesus? I was just listening to, I've just listened to Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, and thinking about that, and thinking about why Odin is the way he is, and the part that he plays in those stories, why he's an old man. and why his son is Thor, and why, and then there's Loki, and you begin to see all this, and you can begin to understand how mythology works. And this is part of what's really good with Peterson, but that God would become a man. And the reason that the church finally said, there's no shorting this. There's no shorting this. And there's a power in that move that you're not going to have if you, butt all around it. And, and finally the church says, can we explain it? Well, here's a whole bunch of words and Greek ideas you can try, but, explain. And, C.S. Lewis, when, it's in the book, A Severe Mercy, which is a great book anyway, Van Auken's book. But C.S. Lewis notes that, so in a Platonic sense, the form of an apple is more real than an apple itself. But in another sense, an apple is more real than the form of an apple. And so Jesus is God, period. And there's something powerful right there that any way you try to short it, you're losing something.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking with Sam about this. I mean, like, what is Christianity without the incarnation? I mean, and I was telling Sam, like, how the incarnation is just the most powerful and beautiful aspect of Christianity to me, and he just didn't see it that way. For him, it was such a weird, strange idea that God could become man, and he sort of seemed to have an aversion to it. But
of course he does. He was raised that way. But I look at this and I think those of us who are Trinitarians wouldn't have the opportunity to appreciate the splendor of the Trinity if Sam hadn't come in our midst and been so doggone stubborn. And we're not gonna hoist them with Servetus and burn them at the stake. And it's an upgrade that we don't do that, because I don't want to do that to Sam, because Sam's my friend. But so Sam, even heretic Sam, is a blessing to our little community and this little corner of the internet, as is John Vervaeke, as is Sevilla King, as is Jonathan Pageau. And so you ask me what I want in some ways. And again, I have to thank Jordan Peterson for this, because he didn't give it to me intentionally, but because of what he did, I now am in some kind of strange communion with you and Sam and John Vervaeke and Anselman and Mary and Jonathan Pageau, and I see Christ's hand in all of this, and it's beautiful, and I love it.
Yeah.
So I don't want 1 million subscribers. Part of me does and part of me doesn't, because what we're enjoying right now is a blessed small thing. And when I go to a meetup and meet someone I haven't met before, or have a rando call in and I have no idea who's going to be on the other end, it's like glory. Here it is. God plays in 10,000 places.
It's the logic of the incarnation that that you can encounter a place of gift anywhere, like heretic Sam can be a gift to you, or talking with Luke is a gift, or every part of the created word can be a source of gift and wonder. That's a beautiful idea. That's why I love the incarnation.
Yeah. And it's real in a way that the idea of it could never be. And this is where you get, Vervaeke has his 50 things of the meaning crisis, and when you're going through it, it's like, oh gosh, sometimes it gets deep and thick, and how am I going to remember this all? But it gets in there, and every now and then something comes up, and it's the point between the finite and the infinite, that space between it, that's what makes things real. And so I love the old Eric Liddell story of the sprinter from Chariots of Fire who ran with his head back, and people say, why do you run with your head back? Because God made me fast, and when I run I can feel his glory, something like that. And so when new people pop up and they're like when you talk to Lars about trolls and the Finns about their mythology, and I just get a sense of God's glory is all over the world, and here am I, aren't I? How could I be so fortunate as to be able to do this and see this and have this? And there's no better place to be.
Yeah,
and success would in many ways destroy it with decadence. And so, God bless little things, little failures, little churches, little communities.
Yeah. We could talk about universalism because just to shake up a little more shit.
I have not read, the thing about David Bentley Hart. You see, now I'm going to get a see. This is why, this is why YouTube's going to take me down. David Bentley Hart isn't a marginalized group. But the thing about David Bentley Hart is whenever I get the sense of listening to him talk, that he's so in love with the beauty of his words, which are in fact very beautiful, that he doesn't escape them. And so, universalism. I have not read David Bentley Hart's book yet. There are so many good books to read, and I'm a very selfish YouTuber. I talk to who I want to talk to, and sometimes that means talking to people I don't know at all. And I read what I want to, and I make videos like I want to. I'm very, very selfish.
Do you think
Go ahead.
Do you think the question of universalism has anything to do with the meaning crisis question?
It has everything to do with, again, like when I'm talking about the same-sex marriage stuff, equality is really high in the Western. So justice. Okay, well, what do you mean by justice? Well, equality. Okay. Well, there's a radical inequality about perdition. And this is the same thing that triggers people when you say the word Calvinism. There's a radical inequality about perdition, but the Bible is unapologetic about some of these things. And the Bible doesn't care. You say, I don't like this. All right, you don't. It's there. You're not getting it out of the book. And so,
but it also has some it also has some aspects that just push back against that inequality and make you wonder, make you critique the inequality from within, I guess.
There's nothing more equal than dead. Is that the equality we want?
Yeah, I mean that's the coming back to this Caputo thing. Like, it's such a totalizing, equalizing freedom that in the end there's no particularity left. I wonder if that's the logic behind, this language of liquid modernity, right? It's sort of such a it destroys all of these differences, religion, nationality, culture, height, weight, sex, whatever it is, and and to some degree, that particular difference is that which makes us human. It's that's where this incarnational gift can come from. You know, it's this diversity of creation, these particularities that, you know, that give life the richness that it does. And there's something flattening and anti-human about this totalizing freedom, which isn't which isn't a critique of universalism, but but yeah, yeah.
Well, Lewis has this great line, you know, his you know, his essay on democracy and equality. I think that's that's just a fabulous essay, because he notes that, and he talks about, you know, a lot of Lewis stuff is recycled through various of the things that he writes, but he notes that, you know, life is dramatically unequal in that I've used this illustration before. Some of the most tasty food I've ever eaten was after Haitian church services, where, you know, the women of this church, while everybody's in there with 3 or 4 hours of church going in and out, because you can't sit through those services that long, but they're out there on a wood stove. They got a pot of rice, and they got a few fish and some other spices. And some of that food that I had tasted in those villages is some of the best food I've eaten anywhere. And it's like, why would these desperately poor people know how to cook so well and enjoy, not very often perhaps, but enjoy the taste of that? You know, and Lewis points out that God, you know, God is very liberal and uneven in how he spreads blessings. That, you know, these, you know, how many of these poor people enjoy the, you know, the joy of sex, or watching a child be born, or, I mean, this stuff is just shot throughout the world. And, you know, what he doesn't give us are the things that we think we really want, which we have in spades in the developed world, which are stability and food security and, you know, long periods of life and good health and opportunity, you know. And so you look at that and you say, what's with God? And at the same time, I mean, we wouldn't even be having this if Jesus didn't himself seed in us the radical equality of, you know, you are all brothers and you have, you know, no master, you know, but one. And so again, Jesus comes along and Jesus gives us hierarchy and he gives us equality. And if you have eyes to see that in the Gospels, you watch him playing with these ideas all the time. And again, that's why Pageau is such a gift, because Jonathan has ways of talking about this I'll never be able to replicate. But we don't need to, because we have a Jonathan Pageau. And we don't need 2 Paul Vanderklays. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why, like, this was something I said on the voice chat the other day, but I think that's why Christianity isn't an ideology or a system or a you know, set of beliefs, as much as it is a way of life and a navigation of these paradoxes of equality and hierarchy and individual and community and all of these different tensions that sort of tug away at your soul, and you sort of have to go through life led by the Spirit and sort of just find a faithful path through those tensions. And it's not going to look like you know, some kind of watered down, you know, middle way balance. It's going to, you know, it could be that that an extreme in one direction is the more faithful option in some circumstances. So yeah, I think that's what it's all about.
And you know, just look at the guys who lived on top of poles. You know, it's like they're going to bear witness by living on top of a pole. There's room for them. And then you've got others who are, you know, bearing witness by, Peter Thiel, wants to bear witness by being a venture capitalist and, and being gay married and all of this. And, we're all going to have ideas about, well, is it really a Christian to live on top of a pole? Is it really a Christian to be gay married? Is it, but finally as a Christian, you say, hey, guess what? There's one judge that we all answer to, and it isn't the court of public opinion. And at some point, let's believe the mythological narrative, as Caputo would call it, at some point, Paul Vanderklee has to stand before the throne and give an account for what he did with however many years he got and the opportunities he was given in this world. And Paul Vanderklee's got to answer for that. And there's some things that I don't want to answer to, but I will. And
that's where it comes down to the individual, right? Here's a bit of a question on the conversation you had on the same-sex conversation. I wonder if there's you were sort of talking to these people who sort of said they have to leave their congregation because they're feeling they can't in good conscience stay with a congregation that is going to go in an affirming direction. And so there's sort of this polarity between this dualism between, are we going to affirm or are we going to not affirm? And I wonder if the conversation can go in a different direction where it's not about, are we going to change our traditional teachings on sexuality, but rather what is the pastoral response to individual human beings who are same-sex attracted in our congregations? Isn't that the conversation that we should be trying to have rather than these sort of extreme positions with, that's ultimately dualistic, impossible to resolve conversation, because either you affirm or you don't affirm. But if you go to this middle ground of pastorally dealing with these people, surely there's a lot more gray space and a lot more room for discernment and a lot more room for agreement between two different factions in the church.
It would be nice. Well, the thing that happens is that the world devolves into basically prison politics, where you're with this gang or you're with this gang, and if you show any signs of weakness, your own gang is going to kill you. So you got to go to the other gang. This is the politics of a culture war. But and I try to keep making this point in my sermons. This is the political atmosphere that Jesus did his ministry in.
Absolutely. Here's the thing about Jesus and how this connects to our current political climate. If you're sort of a right-wing culture warrior and you're sort of seeing how our culture is getting more secular and how the LGBTQ crowd is sort of fighting for more rights and for same-sex
Why did you put the queers ahead of the trans, Julian? Huh? What do you got against the trans? Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt.
I didn't know the acronym had changed. I'm not up to date. But
L comes before G because the ladies come before the gay guys. LGB, then the bis, who a lot of the gays say are just really gays in denial, but you get into trouble to say that even if you're gay. LGBT, then the trans, and then the Qs, the queers. And anyway, go on. I'm sorry. I probably completely derailed your train of thought.
But my point is, if you have sort of this narrative of, here's our Christian civilization, and suddenly we have this assault by these secular forces and these LGBTQ people, sorry, and what have you. You're sort of setting up this culture wars dynamic of these are the people that are my enemies in my quest to have a Christian society. And I think that's sort of exactly what happens in Jesus' context, where you have the Jews sort of trying to maintain their cultural identity within this pluralistic Roman society, and you have the culture warriors, and you have the Hutterites of the time who sort of go hide in a cave, and then and then you have the revolutionaries
The
who say, let's
patient
fight
ferment of the Essenes.
Oh yeah. And then you have Jesus who says, who cares about your culture war? Your culture war. I need to. What faithfulness looks like is encountering human beings and not treating people like political enemies or ideological opponents, but encountering these messy, sinful human beings where they're at. And I just wish we could have that conversation instead of this. It just strikes me that our political polarization is making this an impossible conversation within our churches. And precisely at the moment where Christians need to have some kind of need to show need to witness to how our faith can make a difference in these conversations.
Well, and this gets in some ways back to the institutional question, because Christians have to figure this out if they're running an institution. If they've got no power at all, well, then Christians just have to figure out whether they're going to conform or not conform, and willing to pay the price for nonconformity. So, I want to talk about this issue. I'm probably going to talk with Preston Sprinkle about this issue. He's been working on this issue for a long time, and he and I have been messaging back and forth a bit. And I think he and I are probably quite a bit on the same page. But again, in this particular political context, you're not gonna. It's the misery of the middle, where if you just decide, oh, let's affirm and be done with it, or let's dig in and I don't care. And in fact, we'll go Roman Catholic or Orthodox. They're not changing. I mean, they've made that abundantly clear. And so what's ironic is that if you go Roman Catholic or Orthodox, then you don't have to think about it. And people are like, well, we want the church to, yeah, you're gonna get the church to what? To ordain women. Good luck. But they've got all their own ways of dealing with it. Yet, Andrew Sullivan, who, few people were more successful in carrying the flag for same-sex marriage, for gay marriage, which, sort of still, is Andrew Sullivan Roman Catholic? Well, sort of. And so is Joe Biden. And, so all of these things are just different and weird. And so Protestantism, who knows how long Protestantism will last? The church has had, look at the Donatists. How long did the Donatists last? The church has had many little outgroups, and we'll see what happens to Protestants. Who knows?
Yeah, I was thinking, on this issue today, like, with all of these big questions around sexuality and gender and family, or all of these big hot button cultural issues, I wonder if this is sort of going to be how do you put it? Essentially, if how the church deals with these questions will sort of determine where they end up in the long haul. And so I was I'm reading some biographies on Pope Francis right now, and
which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, I love Pope Francis, which is probably going to disturb some more poop in the comment section. Who knows? But Francis has been sort of controversial for opening up for opening up discussion on the readmitting divorced Catholics into communion. That's the big issue. And I was reading in the biography on, the synod he started up on around that issue, and I just love the approach he took, where he sort of calls together these bishops, from all over the world. You have people from Africa who have their perspective. You have people from Germany who's almost completely secularized. You have the Americans, you have the Italians, and then it brings them together. Then, okay, let's talk about these hot button issues. And when it comes to this divorce and remarriage question, you have sort of these two extreme groups developing. The conservatives, this is a settled issue, we shouldn't even talk about this. And then the liberals who say, let's just let them into communion. We can deal with this. And then the author talks about how, as this synod progressed, as these people sort of hash out their differences, there sort of starts to a sort of middle ground starts to emerge, where you're talking about pastorally dealing with these people and dealing with a case-by-case basis on readmitting them into communion. And I suppose as I was reading this, I thought, this is an issue that so many Protestant churches are completely at loggerheads with. And as we navigate these questions, is this the time when the more traditional Catholic or Orthodox churches will be vindicated for being able to find a path through these extreme positions and maintain their institutional stability, while other institutions sort of lapse into the right or into the left and become irrelevant? So,
well, it's always helpful to remember that what happened with Protestants is that Protestants modulate institutionally in a different way than Roman Catholics. And that it's easier to track the Protestants because they all have little flags. Whereas the Catholics, it's all one thing. But all that stuff is going on under the surface. So Joe Biden's a Catholic, Jimmy Carter was a Protestant, Southern Baptist. Bill Clinton was a Southern Baptist,
Obama and Trump were both Christians. In
Donald Trump, Reformed Church of America, buddy. Norman Vincent Peale, Marble Cathedral, baby. That's Donald J. Trump's church. He has a Bible too, So I get in trouble with the Trump fans.
We've disturbed enough church.
Julian, it's your spiritual gift. You're fertilizing the comment section as we go. So it's, yeah. But, part of what you can appreciate about the Orthodox and the Catholics is that they take, because of how they work institutions, they take very long views of things. And there's deep wisdom in that perspective. And in ways that Protestants don't have. Even our two traditions have more of that than, happy clappy evangelical independent church where, that's going on here and here's today and gone tomorrow, like the flowers of the field. whereas the CRC and the Hutterites have been around a couple of hundred years and have some institutional memories going back. And then we say, well, you know, we point back to those creeds still. And so we try to, you know, connect ourselves with the patristics to one degree or another. So, yeah, there's a wisdom in this sort of ballast I don't know enough about the Orthodox are such a new old thing on our church radars now. Yeah. It's a strange thing.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going about 2 hours here, Julian. I don't know if you got any more things you want to cover, or if I should.
Oh yeah, wow. Let's see.
You're gonna go for the record. I don't know what the longest conversation I've had is.
We had a pretty long one in December. When was this? A year ago or a couple of months ago? I don't know. So.
Well, I don't know if this will be a wrap up or not, but I feel enormously blessed by, you know, YouTube and, you know, getting to, because I remember, you know, the first time, you know, I talked to you and it's like, wow, this is wild. There's a Hutterite from Manitoba and he welds. And I remember when I put out like a 10-minute video or something and you sent me a note. It's like, what's this 10-minute stuff? You know, the welders are looking for something here. How dare you put out a 10-minute video?
Not worth downloading.
but then, you know, via the, you know, Joey and Rick put together the Discord and, you know, and that we've been able to maintain a sort of a conversation over the last 2+ years. And Jordan Peterson has sort of created enough of a space so that people can kind of find each other in the conversation and people stick with it. And other, you know, other people come into the conversation like, you know, like Luke and Jeff and Job and Sam. And of course, Esther's always out there. And, you know, to me, it's just a good thing. And I'm just deeply grateful for you and how many others that have had a hand in it and have just made this just fun. So it's been cool.
Oh yeah. It's you don't realize how just how terrific the space we've created until you go, you know, looking for other YouTube channels or other places to talk online. It's just this type of conversation doesn't really exist in other places that I know of. So. And
even hard to find in the church sometimes. So.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So I think, you know, for me, so in all fairness to those who say you're not dramatically unsuccessful because you've had a part in the creation of this is very much to me like the church, because this isn't my creation. I had a part to play in it, but it's your creation and it's Joey's creation and it's Rick's creation and it's Sam's creation and it's Jeff's and Job's and how many people. And yeah, there's sort of a hierarchy in some things, but for the most part, it's just happening out there, and it's very church-like to me, and it includes heretics like Sam and you know, non-theists like John Vervaeke,
and people with bad opinions like Esther.
Oh boy, am I gonna get messages from Esther after this one. She's gonna say, don't encourage Julian. It's not right that you encourage Julian, that he should give up Kierkegaard and coffee with Kierkegaard. He names his blog after that Dane. Someday, Julian, boy. Someday you'll be old enough to become a young fogey and give up your childish Kierkegaardian ways.
That's what she tells me.
Well,
yeah.
I should bring this to a close, and yeah, I'm glad we did this, so then people won't worry that I'm under something heavy because I didn't do a video every day. You know, a lot of YouTubers, you know, I talked to the Logos Made Flesh guy. That dude does a video, like, he'll wait for months and before he does a video, and it's like, wow. And he's like getting everything just perfect. And I'm like, boy, he and I are the opposite ends of the YouTube spectrum, baby.
You're doing the patient ferment thing.
It's my patient ferment on my channel.
Violating all rules of YouTube growth, and yet paradoxically this channel continues to slowly grow.
I'm a little, you know, Benjamin Boyce had that thing about, I'm so glad I never monetized the channel, because he had this little thing about, you know, this little checklist before he thinks about whether he's, you know, talking about marginalized groups. I don't know. I think Hutterites are marginalized groups. How many Hutterites are there out there? Are you feeling the pressure, huh? Are you feeling marginalized? No, I think someone else got it. Well, I think it's my son again. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. They just put it there. So. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm curious. That's big. You're on the phone. Yeah. I'm sorry. Fine. All right.
Yeah, I should go get some dinner.
All right. Well, Julian, it's always a pleasure. And this is why I believe in the life of the age to come, because I look forward to having you and many of the people that we're talking about or talking to and even about together for long conversations in the age to come. And I can't think of anything more fun. So
That's bring it on. That's what I want.
yeah. All right, Julian, you enjoy seeding those fields and doing all that injection you need to do.
Yeah, glad I could bring a bit of it to your YouTube channel. So
that's right. Well,
yeah.
You take care. It's good talking to you.
Yeah, same here.
Bye-bye.
Later, Paul.